My sister betrayed me with my fiancé 1 week before my wedding. She got pregnant and my parents defended her. But when Chelsea died of cancer 3 years later, she begged me to adopt her daughter, and what I decided left everyone speechless. I'm 31 years old. I work in real estate, and I need to get this story off my chest because what happened 6 years ago basically destroyed my life, or at least the life I thought I was going to have. The thing is, looking back, I can see all the signs I ignored, all the moments when I should have seen what was coming. But I guess when you're in love and excited about your wedding, you don't want to see the ugly things happening right in front of you. I met Kevin when I was 22, at a mutual friend's party. He was handsome, like tall, green eyes, and he had that sense of humor that makes you laugh even when you're having the worst day. We became a couple almost immediately, and for 3 years we were, that couple everyone said was destined to get married. My family adored him, especially my younger sister Chelsea, who was like 19 when we started dating. Chelsea was always the spoiled child of the family, the baby who could never do anything wrong, and my parents basically gave her everything she asked for. Me, being the older sister, like I was always the responsible one, the one who got good grades, the one who got stable jobs, but I never got even half the attention that Chelsea got just by existing. When Kevin proposed to me after 3 years together, I honestly thought it was the happiest moment of my life. It was at a nice restaurant, nothing too elaborate but perfect for us, and when I said yes, I felt like everything was finally falling into place. We had plans, you know? We wanted to buy a house, have kids eventually, build a life together. We started planning the wedding immediately, and I was so excited, I basically couldn't think about anything else. The date was set for 6 months after the engagement, enough time to organize everything without going crazy. But then I started noticing weird things. Chelsea, who had always been friendly with Kevin but nothing more, suddenly started being around him all the time at family gatherings. She'd sit next to him, laugh too loud at his jokes, find excuses to touch him casually, on the arm or shoulder. At first I thought she was just being friendly, like maybe she was excited that her sister was getting married or something. Kevin didn't seem uncomfortable with the attention either, which should have been my first red flag, but I was so busy with wedding preparations that I basically ignored it. Weeks went by and things got weirder. Chelsea started showing up at our apartment without warning, always with some excuse, that she needed advice about something or that she was in the area and wanted to stop by. Kevin worked from home several days a week, and I was at the office, so technically Chelsea could visit him when I wasn't there. Looking back, I don't know how I was so blind, but I guess you'd never think your little sister, the person you grew up with, would be trying to seduce your fiancé, right? A month before the wedding, I started feeling like something was wrong. Kevin was distant, like distracted all the time, and when I'd ask him what was wrong, he always said it was work, stress, or that he was tired. Chelsea was also acting strange, like avoiding my gaze at family dinners and leaving the room when I'd enter. My parents didn't notice anything. Or if they did, they didn't care enough to say something. Diana, my best friend since kindergarten, was the only one who told me openly that something didn't add up, that Kevin and Chelsea were acting super weird together. But I defended her because, she was my sister. How could she do something like that to me? 1 week before the wedding, exactly 7 days before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, my parents called me saying they needed to talk to me urgently, that it was important and that I needed to come to their house that night. I arrived thinking maybe they wanted to talk about the last details of the wedding or something, but when I entered the living room, I found my parents sitting on the couch with serious faces, Kevin standing by the window unable to look at me, and Chelsea sitting in the armchair crying. My stomach sank immediately because I just knew, that something horrible was about to happen. My father was the one who spoke first, with that uncomfortable voice he uses when he has to say something difficult. He said, "Melissa, we need to talk about something that has come up," and I just stood there waiting because my brain was already trying to process what my eyes were seeing. Chelsea kept crying, Kevin kept not looking at me, and my parents seemed more worried about Chelsea than about me, which should have been another sign of what was coming. Then my mother said, "Chelsea is pregnant," and I thought, okay, that's a problem, but I don't understand why they're telling me this now, a week before my wedding, until she added, "The baby is Kevin's." I honestly don't remember the next few seconds after hearing those words. It's like my brain just completely shut down. The next thing I clearly remember is being on the floor, not knowing how I got there, with my mother trying to touch me and me pulling away from her. Chelsea was saying something about how she was so sorry, that she didn't want it to happen, that it just happened, and I remember thinking, it just happened? How does something like that just happen? Because according to what they managed to explain to me between sobs and pathetic excuses, the affair had started weeks after our engagement and had continued for months, and Chelsea was 9 weeks pregnant, which meant they'd been together all that time while I planned a wedding, while I chose flowers and tasted cakes and dreamed about our future. Kevin finally spoke. With that voice I knew so well, but that now sounded like a stranger's, saying he was sorry, that he never meant to hurt me, that things just got complicated. And that phrase, things just got complicated, made me explode in a way I never thought possible. I got up, from the floor, crossed the room, and slapped Chelsea so hard that my hand hurt for days after. My parents screamed. My mother ran to comfort Chelsea, of course, and I just stood there shaking, looking at these people who were supposed to love me, who were supposed to protect me, and I felt like I was looking at strangers. I said horrible things that night, things I don't regret one bit. I told Chelsea she was a selfish, manipulative bitch. I told Kevin I hoped he'd rot. I told my parents they were cowards for allowing this to happen under their roof and then having the audacity to ask me to be understanding of the situation. My mother tried to say something about how Chelsea was young and had made a mistake, and I remember screaming at her, "A mistake? A mistake that lasted for months?" And then I left that house swearing. I would never speak to any of them again. The following week was literally the worst of my life. I had to cancel the wedding, return gifts, call all the guests to explain that the wedding wasn't going to happen. I didn't tell most of them the truth, just that Kevin and I had decided not to get married, but Diana knew the truth and she was the one who basically kept me functional during those days. Kevin moved out of our apartment, technically it was mine because I paid most of the rent, and 2 weeks later I found out from a mutual acquaintance that he and Chelsea had gotten married in a private ceremony. It's basically a legal procedure, so the baby would be born within a marriage, because I guess my parents cared more about appearances than the fact that their younger daughter had destroyed their older daughter's life. The following months were a total disaster. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't concentrate at work. Everything reminded me of Kevin or my family's betrayal. Diana tried to get me out of the house, to make me do normal things, but I was completely broken inside. I started drinking. At first just a little to be able to sleep, but then it was more and more until I was basically drunk most of the time. I lost my job after 3 months because I was constantly absent, and when I did go, I couldn't function properly. My boss was kind about it, said he understood I was going through something difficult, but that I needed to get help before I could come back. I decided to move to another city, like I needed to be away from everything that reminded me of my old life. Diana helped me pack and accompanied me on the trip, but once I settled into my new small and depressing apartment, she had to go back home and I was truly alone for the first time. The depression got worse. Much worse. There were days when I wouldn't get out of bed. Days when the only reason I'd eat was because Diana would call me and force me to promise I was going to eat something. Money ran out quickly because I wasn't working and had to pay rent and food and, well, I was also spending quite a bit on alcohol. After about 6 months in that city, I basically ran out of money. I couldn't pay rent, barely had food, and was seriously considering horrible options just to survive. I called Diana crying one night, completely desperate, and she literally drove 5 hours that same night to come get me. She took me back to her city, not mine because I didn't want to go back there, set me up in her guest room and basically forced me to recover. She was the one who took me to therapy, who made sure I stopped drinking, who helped me look for work again. It took me about 8 months to feel remotely human again, and honestly, I don't know where I'd be now if Diana hadn't been there. 2 years had passed since the betrayal, when I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It turned out to be Kevin's mother, telling me that Kevin had been in a serious car accident and was in the hospital. I don't know why she called me. Maybe she thought I still cared. But the thing is that a part of me did worry, because you can't just turn off 3 years of loving someone even after they shatter your heart. He was in intensive care for 4 days before dying, and I never went to see him at the hospital because I didn't know if Chelsea would be there, and I wasn't ready to see her. But I did go to the funeral secretly, like I sat in the very back with sunglasses, and left before it ended. Seeing Chelsea at that funeral was strange, because she looked so different from how I remembered her. She was thin, pale, and was carrying a little girl who must have been about 2 years old. Natalie, Kevin's daughter. I felt so many contradictory things in that moment. Anger for what she'd done to me, sadness for Kevin despite everything, and a kind of pity for Chelsea that I didn't want to feel but was there anyway. I left the funeral without talking to anyone in my family, and I thought that would be the last time I'd have to deal with them. But then, about 6 months after Kevin's funeral, my mother showed up at my apartment without warning. Diana had helped me move to my own place by then, and I was working in real estate, basically rebuilding my life from scratch. My mother knocked on the door on a Saturday morning, and when I opened and saw her standing there with Natalie in her arms, my first reaction was to want to close the door in her face. But Natalie was innocent in all this, like the girl wasn't at fault for the horrible decisions her parents had made, so I let them in even though every part of me wanted to yell at them to leave. My mother looked tired, older than I remembered, and started talking quickly as if she was afraid I'd kick her out before she could say what she needed to say. She told me that Chelsea was sick, very sick. She had been diagnosed with glioblastoma, which is a super aggressive type of brain cancer, and the doctors had given her between 1 and 4 years to live. She'd already had surgery, had scars on her head that were covered with a scarf, and was living with my parents. Because she couldn't take care of herself and definitely couldn't take care of Natalie on her own, then my mother said what she'd really come to say. She said, "We need you to consider adopting Natalie when Chelsea dies." She said Kevin's parents were willing to help, but they were older and weren't in a position to fully raise a young girl. That my parents were also getting older and didn't know if they could handle raising another girl, and that I was the only logical option because I was young, stable, and technically Natalie's family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Like this woman who hadn't contacted me in 2 years, who had chosen Chelsea over me when everything exploded, was now in my apartment asking me to adopt the child of the 2 people who had destroyed my life. I told her no immediately, that I didn't even need to think about it. I told her I had spent 2 years rebuilding myself after what her favorite daughter and my ex-fiancé had done to me, and that I didn't owe any of them anything. My mother started crying, saying she understood I was angry, but that Natalie was innocent, that the girl needed stability and love, and that Chelsea was desperate knowing her daughter could end up without a mother who could really take care of her. Natalie was playing with some toys on the floor, completely oblivious to the conversation we were having about her future, and every time I looked at her, I felt this horrible mix of anger and guilt. I told them to leave and give me time to think, though honestly I didn't want to think about any of this. I called Diana immediately after they left and told her everything. And she was incredibly helpful in helping me process without judging me for any of my feelings. She told me I had the right to say no, that no one could force me to take responsibility for the daughter of the people who had betrayed me, but that I also needed to think about whether I could live with myself knowing I had rejected an innocent girl who needed me. I spent a whole week thinking about nothing else. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't concentrate at work. I was basically consumed by this impossible decision I was supposed to make. In the end, I decided I couldn't adopt Natalie. Not because I didn't care what happened to the girl, but because I honestly didn't think I could love her the way a child deserves to be loved, when every time I looked at her, I'd see Kevin and Chelsea and all the pain they'd caused me. I called my mother and told her my decision, and she cried but said she understood, which was surprising coming from her. But then I told her I wanted to see Chelsea, that I needed to talk to her face to face for the first time in 2 years. My mother arranged the visit, and I went to my parents' house on a Tuesday afternoon. Chelsea was in her old room, the one we'd shared when we were kids before I moved out when I was 16. When I walked in and saw her, I almost didn't recognize her. She was incredibly thin, had the scarf, covering her head where she was missing hair from chemotherapy and surgery, and looked so fragile it was hard to believe she was the same person who had been so full of life and energy 2 years earlier. We looked at each other for a long, awkward moment, and then Chelsea started crying and apologizing, saying how sorry she was, that she'd been selfish and stupid, that she should never have done what she did. She said she understood if I hated her, that she hated herself too, and that the only good thing that had come out of that whole horrible situation was Natalie, but that now she wasn't even going to be able to see her grow up. I started crying too. Not because I'd forgiven her exactly, but because the whole situation was so fucking sad I couldn't help it. I told her I couldn't adopt Natalie, but that I wasn't going to completely disappear from their lives. I told her I was going to stay in touch, that I was going to be part of Natalie's life somehow, but that I couldn't be her mother because I wasn't ready for that and didn't know if I ever would be. Chelsea nodded and said she understood, that anything I could give them was more than they deserved after what they'd done to me. We talked for hours that afternoon, like really talked for the first time in years, and although we didn't resolve everything, I felt like something inside me started to heal a little bit. For the next 3 years, I kept my promise. I visited Chelsea every few weeks at first, then more frequently when her health got worse. I got to know Natalie properly, played with her, read her stories, and gradually developed a genuine affection for this girl who carried half the genes of the people who had hurt me, but who was completely innocent of everything. Chelsea lived exactly 3 years after our reunion, like the same day 3 years later, and honestly, there were days when I couldn't believe she'd survived that long with such a bad diagnosis. I was with her the day she died, along with my parents and Kevin's parents. Natalie was with a babysitter because we decided it was too much for a 5-year-old girl to witness. Chelsea was in and out of consciousness, but at one point she grabbed my hand and told me, "Thank you for not abandoning us completely," and I told her I was sorry for everything, for the slap, for the lost years, for not being able to be what she needed me to be. She smiled a little and said I had been more than she deserved, and those were basically the last coherent words she said to me before the drugs took her deeper and she finally fell asleep forever. After the funeral, we all got together, my parents, Kevin's parents, Deanna, who came to support me, and we talked about Natalie and her future. Kevin's parents said they would formally adopt her and raise her, but that they wanted me to continue being part of her life if I was willing. I said yes, that I wanted to be her aunt, her friend, someone she could trust, but that they should be the ones to be. Is her parents, because I still wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility, and honestly didn't know if I ever would be. Now, Natalie is almost 6 years old, lives with Kevin's parents in a nice house with a big yard, and I see her every 2 weeks or so. We go for walks, get ice cream. Sometimes we have movie nights at my apartment where she asks more questions than I can answer about her mom and dad. I tell her good things about Chelsea, the things I remember from before everything fell apart, because Natalie deserves to know that her mother was more than her mistakes. I haven't told her the full story of what happened. Like, obviously, she's too young to understand all that. But someday, when she's older and asks, I'll tell her the truth in a way she can process. My parents and I have a relationship, I guess. Though it's not what it was before, and probably never will be. I see them on birthdays and major holidays, mostly for Natalie's sake. But there isn't that closeness we had when I was younger. Diana is still my person, the one who knows me better than anyone. And honestly, I don't know where I'd be without her in my life. As for me, I'm okay. Not perfect, but okay. I still go to therapy occasionally when I feel like I need it. I work at a job I like. I have friends. I go on dates occasionally, though trust is something I still struggle with. Have I completely forgiven Chelsea and Kevin for what they did to me? I don't know, honestly. Some days I do feel like I've forgiven them, that I understand they were complicated people who made horrible decisions. And other days I still feel that old anger bubbling up when I think about all the time I lost, being depressed and broken. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't something that happens once and that's it. Like, it's something you have to constantly work on. And it's okay if some days you're better at it than others. Last week, Natalie asked me if her mom loved me. I told her the truth. That yes, her mom loved me very much, even when she made decisions that hurt people, and that sometimes the people we love hurt us not because they want to, but because they're human, and humans make terrible mistakes. She asked me if I loved her mom, and after thinking for a moment, I told her yes, that I loved her despite everything. And as I said those words, I realized they were true, that despite all the betrayal and pain and lost years, there was still a part of me that remembered the little sister I grew up with, the one we used to do talent shows with in the living room, the one I protected from bullying at school when she was little. That's the Chelsea I choose to remember when I think of her now, not the one who betrayed me. And that feels like progress, I guess, or at least like peace.